Now let's talk about program evaluation. Program evaluation is a type of research that's done with social programs. And so program evaluation is something that everybody that works in social programs or nonprofits will be involved with in some form or fashion at some point. So if you're working in a program that's providing HIV prevention education, for example, well, you want to know whether what you're doing makes a difference. This isn't necessarily for just research purposes, but because you want to know that your clients are benefiting, that your time is worthwhile, that your funders are investing their dollars wisely. So you start off being motivated because you want to know exactly how much am I putting into this program. You go in wanting to find out whether the program is doing what it set out to do, how it's going to do it, how well it does it, and how important it is if it accomplishes that. So you basically, again, want to know, is it worth it? How are we doing? So you usually start off with something called a logic model, which we'll look at here in a little bit, but I want to give you just a visual of the different categories that things you're going to talk about. You want to know resources or inputs. So what goes in, what's actually done, what is produced, what change comes about as a result, and how does this create long-term sustainable impact? So there's the work and then there's the results. So let's go through and talk about these different pockets. Resources and inputs are usually going to be the same thing in every organization: clients, staff, resources. You're going to need to specify. Your resources or your inputs might be 100 clients. It might be 2 case managers. It might be the pens and the papers and the building and the computers. The time, how many staff does it take? If it takes 3 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff, the energy, and of course the funding to do the work. This is what has to go in. If you think of this as a recipe, these are all the ingredients that go in to do the work. So then you actually have to do the work. So your processes, your activities is what the program actually does. So in other words, you want to make a difference. So what are you actually going to do? Are you going to provide therapy? Do you do groups? Do you do education, case management? Do you supervise? Do you do discharges? For example, one logic model might say, well, we're going to do a conference. We'll meet with parents, caregivers. We'll put in client data. Don't disregard what you do for evaluation purposes, and we'll collect testimonials. These are important activities. So then you have to explain what are the outputs. In other words, quantify it. Put numbers on what you did. We served 100 youth. We provided 2,000 hours of tutoring. 9 out of 10 youth attended 80%. So you might have outputs related to attendance, units of service, number of clients. And what often happens is that sometimes the story just stops there. We helped 100 youth. Congratulations, we did a great job. Well, you know what? That's just not sufficient. It's not good enough. Imagine if you were to go to the doctor and they said, well, we do 100 surgeries, and you would want to know, okay, that's great, but only 50% of the people live. Well, outcomes matter because it doesn't just matter how many things you produce, how many units of service, how many clients. It matters whether it made a difference and what the long-term outcome was. So make sure you understand there's a huge difference between outputs and outcomes. So outcomes are the most important feature of most program evaluations. In other words, is it doing what it's supposed to do? Don't ignore this, because what oftentimes happens is that if you just focus on outputs, well, you might end up finding that you might get funding to do pregnancy prevention, and you go after it. And then you get funding to do parent training, and you go after it. And before you know it, you're doing 20 million things, and you forget what your original purpose was. So you want to specify your outcome at the beginning. so that you can then go back and say, did we do what we set out to do? Of course, your outcome should be evidence-based, which means you need to be able to measure it. Your outcomes should drive the process and the inputs. So if you are wanting to achieve change in parents, but you're not involving parents in any way, then you need to go back and address that in your inputs. If you're trying to create change in parents, but you're only involving children, you need to review your process. So the outcomes drive the program evaluation. To make sure that you don't get confused with outputs and outcomes, just look at these examples. An output could be the number of patients that are discharged from a hospital. That doesn't tell you whether you did a good job or not. Now, if you can tell me the percentage of those discharged patients that can now manage their disease, that is an outcome. These are positive changes. This is just what you did. It's very attractive to just report these to the community, but you need to remember that it is the outcomes, it is the good, positive change that we want to see that really should be reflected in our program evaluation.